Well, tonight we debate the question of union membership and whether it should be obligatory in the workplace. Now, all my life, Michigan has been a union state. In 1989, union membership in Michigan was 26%. So 1 of every 4 people in the workforce. 16 years later, in 2005, it had dropped to only 21.6%, and as recently, even as 2003, Michigan had the 3rd highest percentage of union workers. But this started to change as the labor market changed in Michigan and elsewhere, and in 2012, something happened which I don't think anybody expected, which is Michigan became a right-to-work state, making it illegal for employers to require union membership. By 2013, Michigan was the 7th most unionized state. By 2014, it was the 11th. Now, there's been some slight recovery, but not much. For opponents of right-to-work, the result of shrinking unions is lower wages, fewer benefits, and less consumer spending. For its proponents, however, this is a victory for workers' rights, for personal choice, and it also means less money for unions and political lobbyists. So here we are 3 years into the right-to-work experiment in Michigan. Has it been a good thing? We put that question tonight to a debate, and to help moderate our debate, we have someone whose voice will be familiar to many of you, and we're very happy to have a professional coming between our debaters. Mr. David Nicholas, on my left, has been on staff with CMU Public Broadcasting since 1990. He's no stranger to politics, having hosted and produced both Meet the Candidates and Capitol Report for CMU Public Television since 2002. He's also served as music director, including host and producer of Nightside Jazz and Blues. He's also been news director and morning edition host from 2001 to 2015, and also music director, host, and producer of Mosaic, Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. till noon since October of 2015. So if you want to hear more of David, he's not hard to find. He's right there on the radio. He also hosts The Beat Saturdays from 11 to 2. We're grateful to leave this event in the hands of a professional, which I'll do now. Mr. Nicholas will introduce our speakers and explain the format, and we'll get started. Please join me in welcoming Mr. David Nicholas.
Very nice introduction. Now we have to try to live up to that, so we'll do that. Not sure how the room is divided. Cleveland Indian fans, Chicago Cub fans, that's not up for debate necessarily, but we'll see how the room potentially divides as it goes. Both of our speakers, the format has been laid out with them before they came. Each will have up to 15 minutes for an opening statement. It will be their choice as to whether or not they want to take that full allotment of time. If they would choose to yield any of that, then I'm getting the sense that they may, and that could allow more time in the second half of our program for more of the question and answers. We'll have more about that coming up, but you'll get a chance to address specific questions, either in kind of an open-ended to both panelists, in which we would give each a chance to answer, respond, and so forth, and that'll be coming up a little bit later. After the 15 minutes from each, then we will reverse the order and allow the cross-examination, where then they can question each other about those statements that were made, and then we'll move into that second half of the program. Immediately to my right, James Randall Johnson lives and works in the Finger Lakes region of New York. For the past 3 decades, has pursued careers as a lawyer and college professor on faculty, has been on faculty at 8 colleges and universities since 2004, a legal and political analyst for PBS and network television affiliates, and starting in 2006, has also worked as a conflict journalist covering wars in Lebanon, Israel, Gaza, Syria, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Colombia, and Southeast Asia. He did his undergraduate studies at LSU and Eastern Michigan University, holds a Juris Doctorate from Western Michigan University, and is a graduate of the Tuck Executive Program at Dartmouth. Also did post work at the Harvard Law School in the summers of 1988 and 90. In New York, he serves on multiple boards, and next summer will co-direct the Entrepreneurial Lab at the Cornell University MBA program. Please welcome James Randall Johnson. To his right, Vincent Vernuccio, who is Director of Labor Policy at the Mackinaw Center for Public Policy here in Midland, also a Senior Fellow at the Illinois Policy Institute, a graduate of the Ave Maria School of Law in Ann Arbor. Under President George W. Bush, he served as a Special Assistant to the Assistant Secretary for Administration and Management in the Department of Labor. He has published articles and op-eds in such newspapers and magazines as the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Investors Business Daily, Washington Times, National Review, Forbes, and the American Spectator, and has been cited in several books and is a frequent contributor on the national television and radio shows such as Your World with Neil Cavuto and Barney and Company. He is a sought-after voice on labor panels nationally and in Washington, and has been a regular guest on the Fox News Channel. He has advised senators and congressmen on a multitude of labor-related issues and testified before the United States House of Representatives Subcommittee on Federal Workforce, Postal Service, and Labor Policy. He currently lives in Ann Arbor. Would you please welcome Vincent Vernuccio? As we said, each of our speakers will have up to 15 minutes, and it is their discretion on how they wish to use their time for an opening statement. And we will begin first with Jim Johnson, who will have his opening remarks.
First and foremost, I'd like to thank David for reading that introduction precisely as I wrote it. I received an email from Glenn Moots a couple of days ago stating that he really did need our introductions, our bios. And I said, does it have to be accurate, or can we make this crap up? And he said, it doesn't make any difference because no one's going to pay any attention anyway. So I elected for the latter, not the former. Thank you, David, and thank you to Northwood University. It is so neat to be back here, and it truly is. I used to lecture in this classroom a lot of times at 8 a.m. Some of you, I see some of my students barely. And here right now, and some of you suffered through my lectures in this classroom at 8 a.m. When I left Saginaw Valley to come here to teach for 4 years, people told me I was crazy because I was known as the resident socialist there, and I was coming here to the bastion of the free enterprise system and libertarianism. And my best friend, Andy Rapp, was on faculty here, and Andy and I talked long and hard about it, and he told me something that turned out to be true. He said, you know, when you come here, you're going to find that it's not like you think that it is. Over the 4 years that I was on faculty here, I did Andy's show, I think, 43 or 44 times. And if any of you have seen that show, especially when Andy and I are on together, you know that we're hardly conservative or moderates, although I think he's getting to be too conservative. And I used to joke when we leave the set every day, or joke to my students that were waiting outside of classrooms when I'd walk in here, I'm, you know, we'll find out if my key still fits the door today. You know, who knows? But it always did. And no matter what I wrote in what newspapers, no matter what I said on what television programs, no matter what I espoused at any given point in time, I always found the administration here to be incredibly wonderful in terms of tolerance. I have found less tolerance at public universities. And so I say that with great fondness about Northwood. Maybe as a way to get rid of me in my last year here before I left, they gave me a teaching award, which hangs nicely in my office now in New York. I also want to thank Glenn Moots for bringing me back here yet again to do one of these debates. I've known Glenn Moots for a number of years, And I can tell you categorically, without hesitation or reservation, Glenn Moots is one of the finest human beings I've ever met in my life. He's perhaps the most ethical individual I've ever run into, the most principled. And even though we might not agree on all things politically, how the hell do I get rid of this? I have to get rid of my pacemaker. We might agree in terms of all things political. He is just an immensely wonderful and brilliant and erudite man, and I love him to death. I want to say a brief hello to so many of my former students that I see out here, too. Why haven't you graduated yet? I understand that. It's so good to see you. I haven't been gone all that long. I've only been gone a couple of years, and it is so cool to see you. I stay in touch with you constantly, and I cherish you. And I love watching as your careers progress and your life progresses. And I take a small amount of, a great deal of pleasure and a small amount of credit for that, just a small amount. Before I commence my opening, I do want to apologize for my physical appearance and what may or may not turn out to be my presentation skills tonight. I had a stroke about 2 weeks ago, 10 days, 2 weeks ago, and it has impacted my ability to see out of one eye, which makes it fun when you go through TSA at 5:30 this morning. And to some degree, it has an impact on cognitive functions and speech. But Vinny has kindly offered that any moment when I falter, he will fill in for me. I also want to say one other thing. During the course of this evening, I may say things that are perceived to be not kind to the Mackinaw Center. I'm not fond of the Mackinaw Center, and I'm going to tell you why tonight. I don't know Vinny, what's he?
Vernuccio.
Whatever. I was going to say V2, but I thought that might have historical connotations. You're all too young to remember V2s. I've never met him until this evening. We've exchanged emails, but he is an extremely bright young man and much, much nicer than I thought, and I know why. He's from New York. And he appears to be ever so accommodating, and I appreciate that, especially under the circumstances. So we're going to do what Glenn last instructed us to do. It sounded like the instructions from a referee at a boxing match. He said, just make it entertaining. All right? Make sure you argue. So at some point we're going to have to argue, okay?
Just don't hold it against me.
I won't hold it against you. What I am going to do, though, is take that little sheet of paper with the URL on it and have all 158 of my students back in New York write in positive things about me and negative things about you. All right, sometime last summer, I forget when it was when we first started talking about this, last spring or summer, Glenn started putting together the idea of this debate format on right to work. I had debated a gentleman from the Mackinaw Center on WEYI locally and a couple other affiliates, I think in 2013. And that was moderated slash, I was ganged up on, basically, by Armstrong Williams, who owns that station as well, who had served in the Bush administration. Following that, Glenn had always said, maybe we should do version 2 of this. And a number of things have happened since that time that really have made this topic salient. We've negotiated throughout the summer about the format. We negotiated, I think, as recently as the last 24 hours on the format. We agreed to hell, we'll just do whatever we want. On the resolved, already that's changed since we've been here, which is cool. But in essence, we're going to talk about, at least I'm going to talk about, right to work nationally and in Michigan. I'm going to talk about it from a cultural, from a political, from an economic standpoint, and a number of other aspects. It's really getting on my nerves, and I'm armed. I don't know, is there any way we can address that?
Yeah, I think what's happening is you're getting feedback from your table, Mike, and we've got, that mic, but we've got your mic got quite a bit, because your voice is...
Oh, they are, because my voice is what?
You're a quiet talker now.
Jesus Christ, you should talk to my wife about that. Of course, I don't get a word in edgewise. I'm going to talk about right to work, but we're also going to talk, I suspect at some point, both of us are going to mention the term free riders. And guess what? I've been doing my opposition research with respect to Vinny here, and I found that Vinny has all sorts of great solutions that, I'm going to sit down if you don't mind, that he said potentially we might be able to come to some form of agreement on before the night's over. The odds of that occurring are about the same as cognitive erudite thought emerging from a Trump rally. Okay? So it's probably not going to happen, but I'll meet you halfway, provided that you take the first 2 steps in my direction. We're going to talk about free riders. I'm going to talk about some of the aspects historically of the labor movement and how it's changed. Glenn mentioned that, for so many years we had, Michigan as a right to, it was the bastion of right to work states. I remember lecturing, I've been teaching at the college level, I know it doesn't look possible, for 34 years. And I remember telling students in the 80s, Michigan will become a right-to-work state when dinosaurs roam the earth. How could I have been so wrong? I'll tell you how, and I'm going to walk you through step by step through the process of how Michigan has become a right-to-work state, and through, I believe, the efforts of the Mackinaw Center, an organization called ALEC, the Koch brothers, the Voss family, the Van Andel family, and a host of other dark money. The intention is not to end with Michigan or any other state until we have all 50 states as right-to-work states, and then a host of other statutes, proposed statutes that I believe at least, Vinny, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, wishes to see enacted. Now, nothing that I say tonight has anything to do with Vinny individually. I respect him immeasurably already after just getting to know him in short term. He's a very intelligent and erudite young man, and nothing that I say should be intended as those of you that were my students, you'll remember the phrase, in our classroom, we have the freedom to attack one another's point of view, but not one another personally. Do any of you recall what happens, I said, if you attack one another personally? I will kill you. Yes, I will kill you, yes. And I actually had a student say, how exactly would you do that? I said, I don't know. We'll meet during office hours. We'll work out a method and a time. The resolve for tonight, again, was casually developed, and it's been modified. So it's going to change. It's going to be a fluid process as we go throughout the night. I would submit to you that it's logically impossible to talk about right to work or free riders in singular isolation because they are inextricably linked together. And beyond that, I would submit to you, it's logically impossible to talk about right to work or free riders or additional proposed legislation without talking about the methodology by which we find ourselves in this situation, where we find ourselves with roughly half the states in the United States as right to work states. Some of which, 5 of which, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, are right to work states by constitutional amendment. I'm right. Sure. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I researched it. It came from your website. But it's an extraordinarily labyrinthine process that we're going to talk about. I'm highly interested in talking about right to work, the impact that it has on states, on unions, but on individuals, families, lives, a living wage, and the economy in general. On a larger scale, I think I can conclusively amplify what Glenn mentioned in his opening remarks about how right-to-work states have depressed wages frequently. And that's true, and I've got the quantitative evidence that we'll talk about with respect to that. But aside from that, there's an overreaching impact as to the reason for all of this legislative effort designed to make states right to work, to dismantle essentially the Magna Carta of labor, the National Labor Relations Act, the Wagner Act, and the Taft-Hartley Act, to dismantle it and replace it with nothing, virtually nothing. And we'll talk about that. It's insanity. What it does ultimately is it shifts the economic burden. Somebody's got to pay for this stuff. Somebody pays every time a state becomes a right-to-work state. Wages go down, and I can show you quantitatively and qualitatively that the federal government has to step in and pay more of a state's budget. When that happens, guess who pays? We all pay. Right to work, in my opinion, is nothing more than dark money sought to fund corporate welfare. One thing we do know, and I have studies on this that we can talk about. And by the way, if anybody is interested, email me, contact Glenn. He's got my email at Ithaca College. Every single thing we discussed this evening is annotated, and I will be more than glad to share my sources. And I don't tend to utilize sources that aren't peer-reviewed, something that we don't see always on the other side of this issue. So if you're interested in that, I will share that with you. But right to work has a tendency to depress wages and to transfer this imbalance economically onto the federal government, meaning the rest of us pick up the tab so that corporate shareholders can have it better. There are studies, I can give you studies, that conclusively demonstrate that there is an inextricable link between right-to-work states and income inequality. Where we find right-to-work states, we find increased income inequality. Other nations don't do it this way, and I will give you some examples as we go through this evening. Other nations simply don't do it this way. Where's my timekeeper? You're hiding. No, don't do that. Other nations don't do it this way, and we'll talk about that as well as we go on tonight. Now, I've used the term free rider. Let's talk about a free rider for a second. We'll elaborate on this. I'll throw out a basic definition, and I would be willing to bet perhaps Vinny will take exception to it and want to modify it. But a free rider is someone who is allowed to benefit from union activity and do so without paying the economic cost of doing that. That makes him a free rider. In biology, we have a term for it. It's called a parasite. But Vinny's got a method by which he can address that as well. And he makes a compelling argument. My God, he makes this compelling argument, and I will leave it for him to I read all your material. I don't want to steal your thunder, because you can do it. I've also watched your videos, and you can do it so much better than I can. He's got a way by which we can eliminate the free rider aspect, or so he says. We'll see. We'll see. You know, I would not take exception with him, but we promised Glenn that we would fight. There is a combination of elements that I will talk about a little bit now and more during cross-examination, and especially during closing, since I go last and it can't be refuted. The combination of an organization, as I mentioned, called ALEC, which is a sinister organization, funded by the very same people that fund, to a large degree, the Mackinaw Center, and fund a lot of other right-wing organizations. I know you don't prefer to be called right-wing, you're libertarian, right? Free market. A think tank, right? Which is low on inventory. But I've used that so many times, you had to know that. You had to know that was coming. What ALEC is the American Legislative Exchange Council, and what ALEC does, you've heard of a pill mill, doctors who are arrested for just generating script after script after script. ALEC is a bill mill, all right? It is funded by dark money again. I can give you examples of who funds it and to what degree. And what ALEC does is it provides model legislation, a great term, model legislation. Model legislation is legislation that can be taken back by legislators throughout the 50 states, introduced into state legislatures where they believe they have enough control, and enacted. That's how Right to Work came to be in the state of Michigan, for example, as we're going to see. It's a distasteful process. What it basically does is hijack democracy. When we look at how unions operate in other nations, and I'll pick a couple that we'll talk about in particular, one in particular. They have a unique concept. Union activity and union membership is ensconced in one word: democracy. What the Mackinaw Center wants to do, what ALEC wants to do, and what a lot of dark money, including the Koch brothers, want to do, is to eliminate democracy from unions by simply eliminating unions. You're going to hear a lot of crap about, it'll be so great because individual workers can negotiate for themselves. Think about that from a morale standpoint. If you've got a medium to large size employer where everybody can negotiate for themselves. It's amazing. I can read that. It says 30 seconds. Okay? I will yield my 30 seconds to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Vincent. Whatever.
Well, thank you, Professor.
Yes.
And thank you for trucking down here, by the way. And if you're all right, I'm just going to sit right here. I hope you don't think I'm too close to you, though.
I got up there for nothing.
I can go. I mean, if you want me to.
I just don't want you to see what I'm writing.
Okay. I'll look at you guys. Is that okay? Well, first of all, Northwood, thank you for hosting this. Professor, thank you for coming down here. Jim, excuse me. And trekking on the puddle jumper, hangover-inducing, or CRJ Canadian airline or airplane that you took over here from Ithaca.
It's two aircraft made by a Canadian snowmobile manufacturer.
And it sounds like it too. I've been on this. Well, anyway, Professor Moots and David, thank you guys for hosting, and Professor Moots, thank you for all the hard work you put into this. I think worst of it is getting to deal with the two of us going back and forth, which is never going to be a pleasant experience. So thank you very much. You know what, I'm going to jump right into it. Obviously, a lot of you know Jim a lot better than you know me or you know Mackinaw. I'd also like to remind you, we're right down the road. So if you want to see the scary boogeyman that Jim was talking about just now, please, seriously, open invitation, y'all. Professor Moots can get you my contact information. Would love to give you a tour. Would love to give you some one-on-one conversation. So we're literally right down the road. So come on down and, I don't know how bad you think it might be for them, but come see for yourselves. It could be fun.
There are 12-step programs and antibiotics to take care of it. So.
Thank you, Professor. Well, let me jump right into it. One of the things that I noticed, Professor, Jim, is that there's a lot of ad hominem attacks. Not talking about killing or anything like that. There was a lot of reference to some studies, big studies that are peer-reviewed, by the way. But there was no definition of what is right to work. This big scary thing that we were talking about, that causes all these awful things. What is it? Right to work is really simple. It simply says that a union can't get a worker fired for not paying them. That's all this bill does. With all the back and forth that Jim's going to have his statistics, I'm going to have mine. Frankly, I went to law school, plus there was no math on the LSAT. So, he's going to come with his studies. I'm just looking at government data. And we might also disagree with the reliability of government data, but this is what's coming from organizations such as the Department of Labor, Department of Bureau of Labor Statistics, and Census Bureau, all of this different things that I'm going to reference. Government data, and haven't done anything fancy to it. It's just simply numbers that are put out by government agencies. So we're going to talk about some of that. But let's get back to what right to work is. It's a law that says that a union can't say you have to pay us or you're fired. It doesn't affect collective bargaining in any other way. Workers and unions, they can still negotiate with employers over wages, hours, working conditions. Anything that a union and workers can negotiate for before a right to work law, they can negotiate for after a right to work law, except for the ability to say to an employer, this employee is not paying us, so you have to let them go. That's all it does. Now, right to work is fundamentally, it's about freedom. It's about the freedom to choose, this union's doing a good job, and I want to voluntarily support them, or this union's not doing a good job, and I don't want to support them. That's it, nothing more than that. But what we see with right to work states, because it gives that power to employees, and it sends a message to job creators that we're putting employees and workers and job creators ahead of special interest, that states with right to work are doing a lot better. We're seeing higher population growth. We're seeing higher wage growth. And yeah, wages in right to work states are going up, and they're going up faster than wages in the non-right to work states. We're seeing more jobs. We're seeing lower unemployment. And when you factor in a thing called cost of living, workers are actually making more in right to work states. And Professor, I know you said you head down to New York City quite a bit. Do you know how much rent is in New York?
No, you didn't hear me say it. I live down there.
Your wife heads down there. You're in the same state. It says New York, right?
It's 4 hours away. Thank God.
I grew up there. I'll agree with that. And part of the reason I'll agree with that is because rents are. Do you remember the man? The rents are too blank high.
Too damn high.
Too damn. Well, we're from New York now, but I figure I'm with Mackinaw Center, so my perception of Midland is you can't say things like that. But if you open the door.
My students would have like nothing less.
All right, so the man said the rent is too damn high. In New York, it is too damn high. And I just saw an article. It's over $2,000 for a micro apartment. You know what a micro apartment is? Less than 300 square feet. New York City. And you're talking over $2,000 for a shoebox studio apartment. You compare that with an apartment in Selma, Alabama, one bedroom, it's less than $400. You know, the average mortgage in Alabama, $800 for a house. For a house mortgage, compared to, you know, $2,000 to $3,000 for a shoebox apartment in New York City. Then you ask yourselves, okay, what does that mean? Well, that's cost of living. It's the cost of rent, it's the cost of the mortgage, the cost of groceries, gas, taxes, all that. You take all that into account, and you know what? Yeah, workers in New York are making more, but they have much greater expenses. So when you smooth all that out, and you say, okay, let's compare apples to apples here. Workers in right-to-work states are making about 4% more than workers in non-right-to-work states, because their expenses are lower. And the wages are actually growing faster. Now let's say, you know, rather than just talk about, well, what's going on in the country as a whole, and we'll do that. Let's talk about Michigan. Y'all from Michigan here? Mostly? All right. You remember where Michigan was only a few short years ago? We weren't doing so well as a state. Our unemployment was some of the worst in the country. Now, you remember the joke, last one in Michigan, turn out the lights? Our population was fleeing. We had one of the worst population out-migrations in the country. Our wages were plummeting. Our wages were actually dropping. Incomes were dropping. Property values were dropping. And then, I'm not going to say that right to work was the single magic bullet that turned it around, but it was a part of it. And now what's happening? Wages are up. Unemployment is down. Our population is coming back. Property values are up. I dare to say it's night and day from where we were a few short years ago, and right to work played a big part of that, saying that Michigan is open for business again, and we want to attract workers and job creators to make us prosper. And I'll bore you with a couple numbers real quick, and I apologize in advance. 863,000. Michigan lost 863,000 in our first decade of this millennium. Between 2000 and 2009, lost 863,000 jobs. Our wages went from $1,000 above the national average to $4,000 below. And once again, with population out-migration, we're one of the worst in the country. Our incomes now are almost a full point above the national average. Our wages have grown 9%. Personal income, 9% greater than when right to work went into effect. We've added 263,000 jobs. Wages themselves, weekly earnings are up 5% since right to work. And unemployment is down. Do you know how much unemployment is down? 10%. Unemployment has dropped 10% since right to work went into effect. We were almost 15%, now we're just under 5% unemployment. And this is what we're seeing across the country, not just in Michigan. If you look at the last couple right to work states, Oklahoma, you saw the wages going up. Indiana, wages have gone up, and they far outpaced the national average. In fact, the only one that's beating us in the region right now is Indiana, as far as wage growth. Same thing with unemployment. The income growth, 91% for right-to-work states versus 72% for non-right-to-work states in that first decade of the millennium. So when you hear, well, you know, right to work and wages, yeah, pass a right to work law, wages actually go up. And this isn't from a study where they've massaged the numbers and had fancy regression analysis and stuff like that. This is just government data. This is just looking at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and saying, what were wages then? What are wages now? Just comparing them. Population, right-to-work states are vastly outperforming the non-right-to-work states. And in unemployment, right-to-work states are 4.7 versus 5.1 with non-right-to-work states. So we're talking about more jobs, greater population, and higher wages. And let's talk about some personal stories here. You want to put a face on right to work? Well, right before right to work was enacted, there was, do you remember the ballot initiative that the SEIU was putting forward in 2012. I don't know if you guys can remember, if you guys remember that. But essentially what they wanted to do is they wanted to unionize home health care workers. You know what the vast majority of those home health care workers were doing? They were taking care of sick family members. It was like Robert and Patricia Hines of Macomb Township. They were taking care of their 2 adult disabled children. They kept them at home, and they were providing for them. In exchange for that, they were getting money from the state, Medicaid money. Well, the SEIU saw that and says, well, I want a part of that. So they came up with this scheme of saying, well, because you're getting money from the state, you're a state employee. But you're not really a state employee. You're just a state employee in regards to being able to unionize. And if you're unionized, guess what? Before Michigan was a right-to-work state, you have to pay union dues. And you can't opt out of those full union dues. So they were taking money from the nurses without any say. Now, luckily, Mackinaw Center, the big evil Mackinaw Center, like Jim was talking about, we fought for the Hayneses and people just like them, and we put an end to that scam. But if Michigan was a right-to-work state, it never would have happened because, well, Robert Haynes, who was a police officer and believed in his union and liked unions, as he said, they're just not representing me. I don't know why I have to pay them. And at the heart of it, that's what right-to-work is. It says you have a choice. You can either pay the union or not. And by the way, notice I keep saying pay the union when I'm talking about right-to-work. You heard a little bit about, well, right-to-work and union membership. You can drop your union membership even in a non-right-to-work state. The only difference is that in a non-right-to-work state, you have to pay that union, no matter what. Now, the other thing, and we're talking about free riders, and I think free riders are a pretty derogatory term. I think parasites are worse, but whatever's nice. Original question was, are employees not paying the union free riders? I say they're forced riders because they're forced to accept a union contract whether they want it or not. Now, unfortunately, in right-to-work states, as well as non-right-to-work states, employees that choose not to be a member of a union still have to accept representation whether they want it or not. And Professor, I think one of the things you said, Jim, about being wrong about right-to-work coming to Michigan, I think you said when dinosaurs roamed the earth?
Yes.
I'm hoping the next thing that you're wrong about is that we can't find some agreement. I'm hoping that we can agree on this. And the agreement that I hope we come to is that, listen, believe in strong unions, especially unions in the private sector. We want unions. We want stronger and more unions. But we want everyone that wants union representation in order to have access to it, especially, they have to get a majority. But if they want that union representation, they can have it. But if they don't, they can represent themselves. Only if they choose. They don't want to pay the union, they represent themselves. And this way, the unions don't have to represent those quote-unquote free riders, the nasty term free riders. And if a worker wants to represent themselves and want nothing to do with the union, they should be free to say no thanks. And workers should be free to say, and the union should be free to say, well, goodbye, you're not paying us, then we're not representing you. It's a more fair option all around. And luckily here in Michigan, actually your representative, Gary Glenn, has introduced a bill that would bring this concept, which we're calling workers' choice, to the public sector. And in order for it to happen in the private sector, unfortunately it's going to take an act of Congress, so we have to need federal legislation because most private sector union laws or worker laws are governed by federal law. But here in Michigan, we have a lot more leeway when it comes to the public sector. So Representative Glenn, representative that covers this district, he's introduced the Workers' Choice Bill that would finally free both unions and workers from this unwanted relationship. And it could also increase union membership. Because, hey, if they want the representation, well, just like anything else, they should pay for it. But no one should be forced to accept a service that they do not want. and that's the position of the Mackinaw Center, and that's where I'm hoping that we can have some agreement, something for the unions, something for the employees, and hopefully we can have a meeting of the minds. So, thank you very much.
Before we start, you guys can situate your mics. Thanks. Perfect. Thanks.
You've heard the opening statements from both. You've heard data supporting their points of view, and those points of view summed up quite well on both sides. So we are moving into a cross-examination period, and they will each have 5 minutes for a cross-examination. And this will be, we will go back to the original order with Jim having the chance to ask the questions to Vincent, and then we will reverse that. Mr. Johnson, your time begins now.
Thanks. I believe when we were sitting outside, we both agreed that we would exercise participatory discretion and hold more time open for questions from you all, because that's what really matters here. We can have fun with each other later. And trust me, we will. Now, Benny, you mentioned Gary Glenn. Very curious individual. I follow him from New York, and it's not hard to do. I'm quoting now, everything I'm quoting now is from, I believe, a website edition on the Mackinaw Center website around September 16th, and it's under your new name.
Yeah, it's hard to hear you.
I was just, that's too bad. How much of that insult did you miss?
You look a lot cooler.
Okay. All right. Everything that I'm saying now is taken from a page off the Mackinaw Center website, the Big Bad Mackinaw Winter website, on September 16th of this year, under the author's name, Vinny. You mentioned Gary Glenn. You just said, oh, just one little bill. You know, what was it, the Workers' Choice bill?
Workers' Choice.
Yeah, and how did you describe it again?
It simply says that a worker doesn't have to pay a union or accept representation from a union if they don't want it, and that union doesn't have to represent workers not paying them.
Do you recall at all adding in your website, which is there for anybody to see, that it protects right-to-work statutes from constitutional challenges?
Yeah. Well,
What are you afraid of in the Constitution? I thought Gary Glenn was a constitutional. What are you afraid of in the Constitution?
Well, I'm afraid that what's going on right now is that Obama has nominated a guy named Merrick Garland to the
Who's
Supreme Court.
largely Republican.
Except when it comes to union issues, he, never. The only times he overruled the Obama labor agency is when they sided against unions. But that's another story. What I'm afraid of is that Merrick Garland, or if Hillary Clinton is elected, a justice like him, will get placed on the Supreme Court. And let me finish.
No.
And what is going to happen is that the Supreme Court will eventually, with this scheme that the unions have cooked up to say, well, right to work violates the takings clause of the Constitution. So essentially what the unions are arguing is that they actually own the wages before the workers get it. And
It wasn't quite so simple as you explained it to the audience by virtue of leaving out what was on your own website.
It was that there was the takings clause.
Okay.
And let me finish. So what's going on
You
here?
can come after me afterwards.
all right.
All right. Gary Glenn's been more busy than just that with the Mackinaw Center. I believe, let's see, I can't even read my own writing here. But,
See, now I think what we're doing is when we get into the ad hominem attacks, get away from right to work, because he knows it's a weak spot.
I'm talking about you. You're a fine man.
I like to talk about me.
I
So
know.
please,
I
go
know.
ahead.
Trust me, I've noticed. I've watched your videos all summer. There is another, the union recertification bill. You didn't mention that. Now, that's another Gary Glenn bill, is it not? House Bill 4428.
I'm glad you brought that up, because we're talking about...
Wait. I just asked.
Wait, is it a question or an answer?
We're both lawyers. Cross-examine. I asked you answer. Okay? Is that-
Yes, I believe in democracy, and that's where you're going, because that's what the recertification
That's
bill is
not at all.
about.
Recertification under Gary Glenn, according to the language in your own website, requires unions to stand for recertification every 2 years. Every 2 years. They're recertified, every 2 years they're up for recertification.
Just like Congress.
They're
this-
not,
you
there's a
vote-
rule that you, see, this is the difference between peer-reviewed and crap, okay? Peer-reviewed is important because it matters, because it requires mental heavy lifting. It doesn't, you can't get away in a peer-reviewed academic environment with the fat-free intellectual escapism that the Mackinaw Center does. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, my wife is always telling me I need to eat more fat-free, so, you know, maybe this is a good
You're
thing.
doing well, buddy.
But listen, I mean, are you calling democracy crap? Because
No,
now it goes from right to work, we need democracy, to recertification is now crap.
I'm writing in there.
I think this watches that way.
I'm calling your website something similar, okay? But we're not done there.
That's true, but we are at the 5 minutes.
Gary Glenn, 4430, Gary Glenn, 4429.
We are at the 5 minutes. We would like to reverse the cross-examination, though it has been intermingled to begin. And Vincent, you have the chance now to cross-examine Jim.
Well, first, thank you for plugging those bills. I mean, I'm a secret. I can't plug them. I can just say that we believe in democracy, and we think that just like
That would be lobbying, right?
we can't lobby.
Your 516, give me a break. You can't lobby.
What
Give me a
happened?
freaking break.
We do have the age designation, but let's not get into details. Anyway, we do believe in democracy, and that is why we believe that just like you vote for president, just like you vote for Congress, and just like you vote for governor and state legislature, you should have to be able to vote for a union. But that's recertification. That's something else. But let's stay on democracy for a second.
Sure.
Now, anybody hungry here? Guys, we're going to pizza after here? Yeah? What about Jim picking up the tab? Everybody?
I'll
Yeah?
gladly do it.
All right, well, hey, that's
In exchange
democracy.
for
dude.
shameless applause, I will gladly do it.
Let's give him applause, all right? Well, Jim, since you are so loose with your money, are you a Mackinaw supporter?
I'm actually not a Mackinaw.
Not a Mackinaw supporter.
No. I prefer transparency.
Okay, but you read my stuff.
I read everything that's out there.
Well, the Mackinaw Center, we're nonprofit. So what we do is we put out these studies. Jim has his opinion on it. Many other people have other opinions on them. And we're able to support ourselves because we do good work and people voluntarily donate to us. So Jim, the fact that you're reading my stuff and not supporting the Mackinaw Center, doesn't that make you a free rider?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. It doesn't. I was brought here for hire. I was brought here to debate you, which I'm going to do. You put yourself out there for absolute free, and it's precisely, I think, the work product is what you pay for it.
Well, you should go with the ad hominem again.
It's not about you. It's about the Mackinaw Center.
I know, but well, it's an ad hominem on the Mackinaw Center. I think you went through a list
I've
of
never
people
been
that.
a homonym. I didn't want.
Okay. Well, you see, what's happening here is that we're getting away from what the issue is, and it's just easy to say, oh yeah, you know, this evil person, that evil person, this evil motive, that evil motive. Let's just talk about the issue. And the issue is that right to work simply means unions can't get workers fired for not paying them, that states with right to work laws are doing better. That's where I'd like to stay. And, you know, I think I'm going to probably end the cross there. We're going to have a lot of fun, but let's open it up to you guys. And, you know, if you have ad hominems, let's have some fun.
Let's have tons of ad hominems. Okay.
You are yielding then the rest of your time?
I'll take you up on that.
Yeah, to the audience.
All right. With that, then, I would just say that we will take a 10-minute break. I believe Professor Moots has... Good evening and welcome back. Hope everybody got a chance to stretch, get a drink of water, whatever the case may be. I believe we have everyone back. I hope so that we can move on to the Q&A. And we're going to try to allow as much time for this as possible, but both speakers would like time at the end, potentially as well for the closing statements, and we wanted to have those in and around 8 minutes. So rifling through questions and trying to find some, again, my apologies if we don't get to all. I'm going to hang on to these. I want to consolidate them for some follow-up that we may do, that I may even pursue through our FM news coverage with both gentlemen, and we may end up doing this via some phone interviews or something. They don't know that, but I'm springing it on them now. And it may be some editing that comes from all of this, and obviously I want to share them with Professor Moots for a follow-up, just so that they obviously have a record of all of these. So nothing's going to get destroyed. My apologies if we don't get to all. If you do recall then, as we begin, the last cross-ex came from Mr. Vernuccio to Mr. Johnson, so we will address, and I do have a question that was specifically issued to Mr. Johnson. We're going to try to hold the answers to around 60 seconds, and if the other chooses to rebut that, they would have 30. So thank you to Sherelle for watching those times as well. Mr. Johnson, a question that came from the audience, and it simply says, how is right to work unfair to workers?
Right to work is unfair. Right to work is unfair to workers from the standpoint that, as was pointed out previously, states that have right to work generally are more dependent upon the federal government for their annual budgets. So all of us wind up subsidizing right to work states, whether we live in them or not. I don't live in a right to work state. I subsidize Michigan. And I find that particularly distasteful.
Mr. Vernuccio.
There's absolutely no causality between right to work and government subsidization. In fact, what you see with the right to work states is that workers are making more when you count cost of living, so they're able to pay more in taxes. Now, it is a fact that a lot of right to work states have lower taxes because when you have government unions collective bargaining, they're able to drive up taxes, and they're able to drive up expenditures, and they're able to drive up unfunded liabilities such as pensions. So there is actually a causation between the cost in a state of government workers and government unions.
Next question, and we'll begin with you, Mr. Vernuccio. Quote, you said wages have gone up with right to work. The question is, what about teachers? This person noting the pay cuts that have come in the last 3 to 4 years. For example, in Detroit, no money to pay for their teachers. Your response to that question?
We were simply looking at government data, and once again, I don't want to say that the government data is directly linked to right to work. I know there was a question in the audience on linkage between right to work and government data. We're just saying that in right to work states, you look at the state as a whole, wages are going up. And that is almost universal across right to work states, especially the last few right to work states, which wages have gone up. Wisconsin, Indiana, Michigan, to a small degree because it's a recent right to work state, West Virginia, and especially Oklahoma, because we can look back a lot further than those recent states.
Mr. Johnson, your response?
60 seconds.
30.
30. That's right. You mentioned that during the period, I believe you said 2000-2009, Michigan lost 863,000 jobs. That could have been as a result of your previous boss, George W. Bush, and his economic policies. We now, you say, have made a roaring comeback. It could be because of Barack Obama and 81 consecutive months of job growth under Democratic leadership at the helm. So I think you're on weak ground when you talk about causality. That's the realm of peer review.
I'll also say Grant Holman Snyder, but hey, who's counting?
The next question, and we will begin, this is not a direct question, but we will begin for 60 seconds with you, Mr. Johnson. What are the facts regarding wage and population growth across states due to right to work? You both presented different scenarios. Apparently this person would like those statements, those points of view recounted.
I didn't make a comment relative to population growth and right to work. That's reserved for someone else. I wouldn't say it because there isn't any quantitative or qualitative data supporting it. And as I said before, I can't make a statement from a peer review, from an academic peer review standpoint. I know how low that is, without being able to prove it.
Don't take my word for it. Go to the Census Bureau, go to United Van Line surveys, and just take a look at where people are moving away from and where they're moving to. And you're going to see pretty plainly the states that are right to work are gaining in population. And there's a lot of states that are not right to work. Some of them are losing population, and some just simply aren't gaining the amount in right to work states. People are voting with their feet, and they're voting for worker freedom.
With the exception of Oklahoma and North Dakota.
Next question to you first, Mr. Vernuccio. You said property prices dropped in Michigan as people left. Wouldn't that make it a more attractive place to live? Unemployment is a factor, but who's to say, and I'm quoting here, that right to work did not keep those numbers from bouncing back stronger than they did?
Well, as far as making Michigan more attractive, it doesn't matter if property values are extremely low, and you see for years in Detroit that you can get a mansion for peanuts. If there's no jobs, it's going to be pretty hard to attract people. What Right to Work did is it put job creators and workers ahead of the special interests. It sent that message. In fact, right after Right to Work was enacted in Michigan, Site Selector magazine said that now Michigan is on the list for factories to come and relocate, where before it was probably not considered as strongly because of its lack of a right to work bill. So what we're seeing is that now we have jobs, and that helps bring property values back up because people are able to work and live here.
Mr. Johnson.
Again, that can be summed up, my response can be summed up in essentially one or two sentences. The appearance of two facts occurring concomitantly doesn't mean there's causality, plain and simple.
Next question goes first to Mr. Johnson. This was one that was directed to you, first of all, sir. If you are opposed to the Mackinaw Center's donation of money to legislative efforts, what is your view of the fact that many groups, such as the Teachers Union, are allowed to donate to political efforts? The question is, aren't they the same thing?
They have a vested interest, and I'm not so certain they should be able to. How's that? You like that?
See, I told you we would agree on something.
Get over it. I'm not so sure they should be able to. And I will tag on to that. Your example of the SIU situation. Abhorrent. All right? But that doesn't ignore the vast majority of evidence to suggest that the basis upon which you are arguing the validity of right to work and all the wonderful things it brings are simply not true. You've got to do peer-reviewed studies in order to do it. It requires a lot of work. But you got to do it.
Mr. Vernuccio.
Also, with peer-reviewed studies, Mackinaw Center has a guarantee of authorship. It's on every one of our studies. Every one of our studies is thoroughly peer-reviewed. You can go to our website, Mackinaw, and you guys know how it's spelled, MACKINAC.org, and you can see the peer reviewers that review our studies. As far as government unions and their donations to political candidates, what we have is a vicious circle where you have the government union giving money to the political candidate getting elected, being available to give more money to those unions, more power, and the circle goes on and on and on, and everybody wins except for you guys, the taxpayers.
Question first to you, Mr. Vernuccio. You were quoting statistics regarding population, job increases, and the like between 2000 and 2010. This notes September 08 to February 2009, the period that has been attributed to the quote-unquote crash, and what it did to the Michigan economy. I'm gathering from the nature of this question, do the stats reflect that period as the all-encompassing, or are we looking at potentially an asterisk because of that severe economic period?
Michigan lost a decade. And anyone you talk to will note that the early 2000s in Michigan were a bad time. And it wasn't just the crash. The crash did make things worse. But for a lot of that decade, we were pretty much the last in the country when it comes to unemployment, when it comes to a lot of the economic indicators. So no, it wasn't just the crash. The crash made it worse, but they made it worse for everybody. We were still in really bad shape. In fact, I remember in the mid-2000s, the joke was that we weren't last anymore. Louisiana was when it comes to unemployment. Well, that was because of Hurricane Katrina. And then they had a rebuilding in Louisiana, and then employment started to go up, and then we were last again. So no, it wasn't just an asterisk at the end. It was the whole decade. Michigan was not doing well, but thankfully, things are coming back, and Michigan is doing a lot better today than it was during that decade.
Mr. Johnson, your response?
Yeah, Louisiana, a state I'm very familiar with, is no longer number one in a number of things, including education, healthcare, et cetera. What they are close to, the number two in, however, is, since they're a right-to-work state, with the assistance of ALEC and model legislation, Louisiana now derives 42 cents out of every dollar for its state budget every single year from your tax dollars.
Question first to Mr. Johnson. Somebody that wants more of a defined role that the organization that you referred to, ALEC, plays in regional politics, and how organizations such as the Mackinaw Center, in your definition, interacts and, quote, and/or benefits from that.
Absolutely. Within 60 seconds, it's impossible for me to do that. What I will urge you to do is this. To the questionnaire and anyone else who might have some interest in this, send me an email. I'll provide you 3 peer-reviewed studies talking about how the Mackinaw Center brought Gary Glenn to Midland. And of course, we've seen what that's done for us. The Mackinaw Center is inextricably intermarried, joined at the hip, if you will, with ALEC. You can't talk about one without talking about the other two. It's just one brief example. Locally, you want to see what the downside is? It's spelled in 2 words: Gary Glenn.
Mr. Vernuccio, your response to the association, yes or no?
Mackinaw Center does good work, and we support free minds and free markets across the country. And if you're giving us credit for making Michigan and the country more free, thank you.
I'm not giving you credit for making it more free. I'm giving you credit for making it more bizarre. Gary Glenn's 2 favorite people, Ty Corser and Cindy Gamrat, this past summer. It was amazing to watch from New York. Thank you.
To an avowed socialist, I could see how freedom was bizarre.
That wasn't socialist, pal. That wasn't socialist. That was a travesty.
This question addressed to, first of all, Mr. Vernuccio, and I quote here, what do you have against unions? That is their perception, at least from your remarks, you and colleagues at the Mackinaw Center. And it says further, what caused unions to grow and develop in the first place? So perhaps we have 2 divergent thoughts, but it was addressed to you, so I'll let you comment first.
Well, let me combine it. Well, we believe in unions. We believe in strong unions. In fact, we've put out a study called Unionization for the 21st Century, saying that if unions adapt a voluntary professional association model and give up some of the government-granted training wheels they've had in the past, and they can do it without a change in legislation, I don't have enough time to get into it, that they can be stronger and they can improve. But it's by adapting to the 21st century and being voluntary professional service organizations and providing services to employees that want them and are willing to pay for them, that we want to see stronger unions. And that's how we see the way forward, and that's how we see unions can grow from the small sliver that they have in the private sector right now, from their heyday when they represented about a third. Now they represent less than 7% of the private sector. So in short, we want to see stronger, better unions, and we want to see them be voluntary.
Mr. Johnson, your response?
Yeah, again, I'll keep mine very short because brevity is a virtue. The Mackinaw Center, if you listen to what my colleague just said, he said that the Mackinaw Center is this great study. Notice he didn't say resembling a peer-reviewed piece of work, because they don't. We'll talk about his statement about 100% of their work being peer-reviewed later.
Actually, that study was peer-reviewed. You can find it on mackinaw.org.
Defined peer.
academics within labor economics. I believe we had a former National Labor Relations Board member peer review that study.
Oh my
we
God.
had some.
Really?
Really? Yeah. Are you shocked?
And your scholars from Hillsdale?
Actually, I believe somebody, you may not like this, but someone from Heritage, I believe they were the other
Yes,
peer reviewer on that study.
you're correct. That is
We
not
had-
peer reviewed.
We
No,
had
not
the
peer reviewed.
former, I believe also the former economist from the department, lead economist from the Department of Labor. And you also forgive me, I'm not sure if it was that study or the workers' choice study, but they were both peer reviewed, and these are just some of the names of people that review or peer reviewed labor studies. Former high administration officials in a partisan and nonpartisan capacity.
Both exceeding the time, but I didn't get the exact count, but if we wanted to line it up, at least both got some additional thoughts in there. A couple of more questions, and I look back to Professor Moots, if we're still fitting within your time frame before closing statements. Yes?
Is that a camera or a gun?
We're still doing good on time for a couple of more, yes?
Pictures from the FBI here.
All right, well.
I can't tell from here if there's a gun or a camera.
The question starts out somewhat broad in nature, potentially a response for both, but there is a concluding thought that is addressed specifically to you, Mr. Johnson, and that's where we would be directing the next anyway. What is ethical about being fired for not paying union fees? You can refute legal representation. Why can you not be able to refuse union representation? The thought directed specifically to you. If you dislike so-called free riders so much, why not let them just represent themselves?
Oh, let them represent themselves. What a novel, freaking brilliant idea. Think about the consequences of different wage rates within the same entity. Think about the morale problems. And I've been a CEO, a corporate CEO of a $100 million a year corporation. I can tell you, it would be a freaking nightmare. That's absolutely among the most ludicrous. And there are others. Among the most ludicrous that appear on the Mackinaw, not yours, but the Mackinaw website.
Mr. Vernuccio, your response.
88%. 88% of employees in the rest of the economy do it. It should be good enough for the 12% of the unionized economy to do it too. So if it's ludicrous, it's unworkable, I really don't know how 88% of the rest of employees throughout the country are able to do it.
Notice 88%, how simple it is. It reminds me of Herman Cain in 999. I mean,
So, can't come up with an answer, so we had an uncommon attack. See, there's like a pattern
that
going
wasn't on you.
Oh, no.
It was Herman Cain. I'll go on about Herman Cain all day and all night, pal. The Pizza King.
He's not here. We addressed this question. This says at the top both, but we will begin with you, Mr. Vernuccio, on this. How do minimum wage laws in right-to-work states compare to non-right-to-work states? And they say in this question, are either better off when it comes to the statistical comparisons?
Does this mean I get the longer time to answer?
No.
Oh, that's fine.
Yes, this is the 60 seconds versus the 30.
I don't need it, and I can yield the rest of my time after this to Jim. Right to work has nothing to do with minimum wage laws. It has nothing to do with most other laws. It has nothing to do with collective bargaining, except for taking away the union's ability to get workers fired for not paying them. So, two completely separate issues. We could have a debate on minimum wage and the effects and taking off the first rung of the economic ladder for people just getting into the workforce at another time, but completely different than right to work.
Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, I'm looking for the one of 8, I believe, Gary Glenn Mackinaw Center policies that talks about taking steps, the need also to take away literally livable wages, the concept of a livable wage. And don't take my word for it. Take some time. I'm encouraging. I'm doing your favorite film. Go to their website. Do what I did. Live there for a couple of days. And walk away. And if you think at the end of the time that they're a wonderful organization, so be it. I'm willing to bet you won't.
And by the way, if you want to go to our website, you can do so free of charge, and I won't call you a free rider.
This will be the last question that we will pose directly to both of you, and it happens that we would address this first to Mr. Johnson, because if you remember from our opening, the first closing statement would go to Mr. Vernuccio, followed by Mr. Johnson. So we will conclude first with the exchange on this. To you, Mr. Johnson, first of all, again, an open-ended question. It does not specify, but we address it to you first. How is right to work projected to affect our state over the next few years? Do you have a point of view on that?
I have an opinion, but that's not peer-reviewed, so it's just that, an opinion. Right to work, I see no reason at all to disbelieve that the trajectory of right to work in Michigan will be any different than it has been in any other state. There will be more jobs. You're right. There will be more jobs in right to work states. It'll just be like the miracle of Texas. They'll pay $10 an hour and no benefits. And then there'll be more people on the Medicaid rolls in those states. And there will be more people on food stamps. And guess who picks up the tab? Those of us in non-right to work states.
Mr. Vernuccio, your response?
Well, aside from the whole government thing that he's trying to revert to, I think Jim is right that the trajectory will continue. There will be higher population growth. There will be higher wage growth. There will be more jobs. And the economy. I just said trajectory. Sorry, let me have a period and then I'll move on. I agree with him that the trajectory will stay the same, period, and what I see, and granted, not peer-reviewed, but we can get peer-reviewed studies for you if you'd like on this, that we'll see the continued higher wage growth, the continued higher population growth, and the continued increased economic activity.
I want to thank everyone for the questions that were submitted. Again, we will be hanging on to the rest. We've got two fairly equal stacks, so I think we were able to get through a good number of those, and we do appreciate that. We do want to move on to the opportunity for closing statements, and we will begin. There was a request made that both of these be addressed from the podium so that everyone could hear. I trust that each speaker will be honoring that, and I have it listed as an 8-minute closing statement, and we will begin with you, Mr. Vernuccio.
This is something that I've never understood, that people think right to work hurts unions. To me, it helps them. You don't have to belong if you don't want to. So if I go out in an organizing drive and I tell these workers, if you don't like this arrangement, you don't have to belong. Versus if we get 50% of you, then all of you have to belong, whether you like it or not. I don't even like the way that sounds because it's a voluntary system, and if you don't think the system is earning its keep, you don't have to pay. That's not me, by the way. You know who said that? Guy by the name of Gary Castile, Secretary-Treasurer of the UAW. Praising right-to-work laws. And he's right. Right to work can make unions stronger. It makes them more accountable to their membership. If unions are taking their membership for granted, then yeah, under a right-to-work system, workers will choose not to pay. But what then happens is those unions have to say, okay, we're not providing a service that workers want to pay for. We have to get better. And if they don't get better, then, like Jim said, it would be nice to have a way that they could stand for re-election. It's another topic for another day. But what right to work does is it gives workers the choice to say, yes, my union is doing a good job, and yes, I want to pay my union, or no, they're not. And they don't deserve my hard-earned money and dues. All right to work does is take away a union's ability to get a worker fired for not paying them. It's as simple as that. We heard about statistics, we heard about, well, is this peer-reviewed, is that peer-reviewed? Strip all of it away, all the statistics away. All right to work is about is freedom. It's about the freedom to make that choice. And especially in the private sector, we want to see stronger unions. And we want to see better unions that serve their members and don't take that dues money for granted like they can in a non-right-to-work environment where workers have to pay them on pain of losing their job. Now, could it get better? Yeah, it could get better. And there's a bill in Michigan that could make it better for the public sector. It's called workers' choice. And they could also do it in Congress for the private sector. And workers' choice eliminates any type of free rider. If unions don't want to represent people not paying them, under workers' choice, they don't. And if workers don't want to pay a union and think they can get a better deal on their own, like, yeah, 88%, 88% of the rest of the economy, then they can.
Good God. I immediately did the only thing any rational dog owner would do. I changed his name to Che Guevara. All right? There is a huge gulf between our positions, and there probably always will be. But that doesn't mean that reasonable minds can't agree, not necessarily to get along, but we can agree to continue the discourse and the ad hominems. I'm going to go through a number of these actions, but I want to get through one area in particular because I promised you this early on. When I was a trial lawyer, I learned early on that you never promise an audience something that you can't deliver on. And I'm going to do that right now. I talked about peer-reviewed studies. Peer-reviewed studies matter because you can count on them, you can bank on them, they're quantifiable, they matter. They're hard to do, incredibly hard to do. There's a great little organization that's not, probably 10 miles, Columbia University is about how far from where you're from?
Where I grew up? Yeah, about a mile.
About a mile. Columbia University did a wonderful little 45-page, I killed a lot of trees to burn this off, study on the Mackinaw Center entitled Let the
I spent most of the summer, some of the fall, wanting to come here. But after having gotten to know you, I have completely different opinion. And I believe, although I'm not willing to meet you halfway, or I think that you are willing to meet me halfway, we have agreed that you should know privately to exchange email addresses. Here we go. All right. But to continue spending more time together and talking to see where we can go from here. I think that alone is worth giving them time to do that. Applause to Doug. Several years ago, I bought my first dog. It's an 85-pound white Steeler Poodle. And we rescued it from a hoppy mill outside of Winnipeg. His name was John Locke. I immediately did the only thing any rational dog owner would do. I changed his name to Che Guevara. All right? There is a huge gulf between our positions. And there probably always will. That doesn't mean that reasonable minds can't agree, not necessarily to get along, but we can agree to continue the discourse and the ad hominems. I'm going to go through a number of these actions, but I want to get through one area in particular because I promised you this early on. When I was a trial lawyer, I learned early on that you never promise an audience something that you can't deliver on. And I'm going to do that right now. I talked about peer-reviewed studies. Peer-reviewed studies matter because you can count on them, you can make on them, they're quantifiable, they matter. They're hard to do, incredibly hard to do. There's a great little organization that's now, 10 miles, Columbia University is how far from where you're from? About a mile. Columbia University did a wonderful little 45-page, I killed a lot of trees to burn this off, study on the Mackinaw Center entitled "Let the Buyer Beware." An analysis of social science value and methodological quality of the educational studies published by the Mackinaw Center over that period of time. Columbia University is well known for teacher education and pedagogical excellence. They developed a model to do those things in peer-reviewed studies. This model ranked from 0 to 3 what would constitute a Gallery List article versus a peer-reviewed article, with 0 being nothing and 3 being peer-reviewed. They then went through, and they did thank you, by the way, they did not do it, but the Mackinaw Center for providing a lot of our articles. They went through dozens and dozens of articles, and they came away with the impression that the average rank, remember 0 is nothing, for the Mackinaw Center in terms of the quality of study was 1.08 out of 3. They didn't even halfway, folks. All right? It's not peer review. You have to define what peer is. Che Guevara, my dog, it provides peer-reviewed studies according to their standards. Because before I came here, I kid you not, he took a leak on some of the notes that I had. Right? I take that as him passing judgment on what I had done. All right? That, to me, that's peer review relative to the pedagogical aspects of the Mackinaw Center. That would, according to Columbia, at least get them over halfway. Now, he talks a lot about how, in some of those states you have to pay a lot of money because, you get a lot of taxes. Yes, in New York, we pay a hell of a lot of taxes. We don't mind it. We actually get something for it. For example, we get highways that don't feel like you are in a nightmare. I can tell when I cross over the Ohio line into Michigan because of the quality of your roads. Why? Because you've got a Republican governor, a Republican legislature who are too busy spending time and energy bankrupting major cities, poisoning people in the city of Flint, and on top of it, introducing about 8 or 9 bills that are closely connected to the Mackinaw Center relative to going far beyond just right to work. If any of you just stop and I believe it for a second, I agree with him. We're going to halfway. But if you go to his website, September 16th of this year, he goes far beyond that with all of the Gary Glenn bills. So it's not just that. Now, I mentioned how other countries treat things. Let's go to the automotive industry, which is near and dear to our hearts. So let's look at Germany, for example. In Germany, during you might recall in this country during the 2008 economic crisis brought on by the gentleman that fortunately Vinny worked for. 2 minutes. There was a situation where, Mitt Romney and a few others said, just let it go through. Obama didn't let that happen. What he did instead was save it. We look at how the automotive industry in Germany, in Japan, especially Germany. In Germany, by constitution, unionism is almost 100% allowed and encouraged and mandated in many cases. But you know what? They have relatively few strikes. Why? Because they have also built-in conciliation and mediation. Volkswagen, Mercedes, and BMW in Germany pay their workers between wages and benefits the equivalent of $67 US an hour. The United States, we pay our workers here in this country in the automotive industry about $33 an hour. How can they do it? According to the gentleman who is the chairman of the American European Economic Consortium, they do it in one word. That's a word you've heard many say he likes a lot. Okay. When everybody participates in a union, everybody, quite honestly, as I said, they don't strike because there's a vested interest in not striking. Germany has a constitutional amendment which forces corporate executives to listen to the workers. Here in Michigan, we've got Gary Glenn, who was brought in here by the Mackinaw Center with 8 or 9 bills trying to go far beyond right to work and decimate the rights of workers. As he said, they collaborate, we confront. Thanks.
I'd like to thank all of you for attending this event. I just want to say very briefly, and you've all been very patient and gracious with your time. My position over 15 years in doing a number of events like this, and the way that I host the programs that I do for CMU Public Television, and my record as a reporter, is that I give the voice to the people that I'm talking to. I don't try to become confrontational or sensationalistic. I leave that to many others, and I can list names on both ends of the cable news spectrum who are doing nothing but. I respect the intelligence of the audience, and that comes from the very youngest of you who may be voting in a first or second election to others who have voted several times like me, and some who are voting for many, many years beyond that. I respect your intelligence. I did not want to dispute, interrupt, or get in the way. You are smart people. You can think for yourselves. You can take anything that these gentlemen said, agree, disagree, or I hope most of all, curious, and read and learn and decide for yourselves. In 1 week, you have an opportunity to do that, whether you're voting here, whether you're voting absentee for wherever you call home, and moving forward in whatever pursuit that you have. I would encourage you to do that. That is a right and freedom that we all have. And Election Day is 1 week from today. Thank you to Sherelle Granger for keeping the time for us this evening. Thank you to Professor Moots and all of the sponsors for welcoming me. It's been an honor to be with you. In 2 weeks, we will be back for another topic, and I've been invited back. I do appreciate that. Thank you very much for your time. Once more, a round of applause.